Chevy had no idea that in 1955, their newly introduced small block overhead valve V8 would become not only a runaway success for the brand, but it would also become the most prolific automobile engine ever produced. This versatile V8 for the masses was shoved into every role that one could possibly imagine, from tearing up the canyons in Corvettes, transporting families across America in wagons, and to carrying GIs through the thick jungles of Vietnam. The small block Chevy did it all. Over 110 million of these motors were built over the years. Statistically, if you are an American and above the age of 20, you have almost certainly ridden in something small block Chevy powered. But how did the greatest engine ever made come to be? Well, the answer to that might surprise you. The birth of the small block Chevy can all be traced back to World War II, as America's auto industry was dedicating nearly all of its might towards helping with the war effort. Production car innovation grinded to a halt, and as such, anyone who wasn't fighting turned their eye towards planning for the return to a pre-war economy. In the automotive industry, that meant one without material constraints or war rationing. And after World War II had ended, the post-war economic boom was even better than anyone could have imagined. Engineers at General Motors were quickly working together to release innovative new models and technology for this post-war America. And the engineer that this story centers around is a man by the name of Ed Cole, who, if you are a serious car guy, you would already know this name. Cole was born for the responsibility of bringing the small block Chevy to life. Born on a farm and then working his way to getting a spot at the General Motors Institute of Technology, Cole was a very talented engineer. He was appointed to work in the Cadillac division, where he would play a pivotal role in creating Cadillac's next generation of motors. The vehicular arms race at the top of the food chain for luxury brands like Cadillac was fierce. And in an effort to blow away the competition, Cole and the engineering team knew that the way to come out on top was to ditch the tried and true flathead engine architecture and go for broke with something better, an overhead valve design. While flatheads now in production cars are non-existent, back in the day they were the prevailing design here in the States, as a low-cost yet simple power plant that had the valves inside of the engine block. This new overhead valve design would place the valves in the cylinder head, which allowed for considerably better airflow, power production, and even better fuel economy. By 1949, Cadillac's production-ready overhead valve V8 was here, and while it was a small but important step for Cadillac, it was a major step for mankind, and for Ed Cole's career. Cole shot up the ranks at General Motors further, where around 1952 he was promoted to the head of manufacturing at Chevrolet. He then switched positions in GM's corporate web to that of chief engineer, which was where he could inflict the most damage on other manufacturers from. Once given this position, it was clear what Cole's direction was going to be. The introduction of the overhead valve V8 for Cadillac was a win in literally every single aspect, so why not trickle that down to Chevrolet? However, Cole couldn't afford just to sit on this pipe dream of an idea. Time was of the essence, as by now Lincoln had cracked the code to an overhead valve V8, which meant that a version for regular Ford cars wasn't far behind. Here's where things get interesting though. Chevy had already been working on their own prototype for an overhead valve V8, which was a 231 cubic inch mill. But by the time Cole took the reins, it became clear to him that his new corporate vision for a lighter, more efficient lineup of next-gen Chevys just wasn't going to happen with that 231. So they scrapped it. Cole gave his engineers a ridiculous ultimatum. They had just about 2 years to engineer and create from scratch a brand new overhead valve V8 that Chevy could take to market, that was lightweight, easy to manufacture, could make great power, and could be insanely versatile. This was like asking the Air Force for a fighter jet that was good at dogfighting, great at ground support, good at bombing raids, and still asking for it to be cheap to make. It seemed impossible. But with a team of talented draftsmen and engineers working seemingly around the clock to make it happen, it was going to get done. Ed assembled a damn good team to take charge on the project, and as such, damn good things got thought of. Don McPherson contributed to a breakthrough cylinder head design with wedged-shaped combustion chambers and an inline valve layout that minimized machining time and boosted airflow. Meanwhile, a basement-built rocker arm system from Pontiac's Clayton Leach became the basis for a lighter, self-aligning valve train, which was further refined with hollow pushrods and lock nut adjusters to simplify assembly and improve durability. Manufacturing wizard John Dolza revolutionized the block casting then, cutting the number of cores nearly in half and trimming the crankcase walls for the small block to a slim 0.156 inches, helping the finished engine weigh just 531 pounds, leaps and bounds less than any V8 Chevy that was ever made before that. And finally, in just 15 grueling months of sheer willpower and determination, Chevy had their diamond. Forged under the immense pressure of it all was their new 265 cubic inch small block V8s, which when launched in 1955 in top trim made 195 horsepower at 5,000 RPM, armed with a 3.75 inch bore and a 3-inch stroke. Because Chevy had to scrap the project once altogether, that meant by the time the small block was available to the public, Ford and others already had their own overhead valve V8s. But it didn't matter, because the small block Chevy was just better. The 265 was here, and not just in the Corvette. Lower trimmed models of the small block were dropped into the brand new Tri-5 Chevys, which also became major smash hits. Things were going great, and thanks to the foresight Cole and the team had about making this small block an easily packageable motor, it wasn't hard to fit it in various vehicles. The small block was quickly becoming available in everything from Chevy's trucks to the Impala, and with people like Zora Duntov at General Motors, this new small block was about to get a crash course in performance. And that's what's so amazing about the small block Chevy, is that it lived so many different lives for so many different people. For some, it was the work truck, and for others, it was the motor that could be tinkered with and tuned into a high RPM singer. Soon, the 265 was putting out 240 horsepower in top trim thanks to a more aggressive cam and a twin 4-barrel carb setup. Chevy punched out the 265 to a 283 by 1957, and in top trim, it was now making 283 horsepower thanks to its fuel injection system. And Chevy kept on cranking the displacement and pushing the envelope, because next came the 327. The aftermarket and hot rodders alike began to take notice after this. Custom ground cams from legends like Ed Iskandarian and new manifolds from companies like Edelbrock started to flood the market, as everyone was looking to cash in on all that new small block Chevy speed. When the 327 came out in 1962, it brought with it a new recast small block architecture with a 4-inch bore and a 3.25-inch stroke. And this 327 gave birth to various other GM motors of the era, such as the legendary DZ302 small block for Trans Am racing, and then nearly a decade after that 265 came the iconic 350 cubic inch small block in 1967. And that one's the kicker, because it stayed. Through the muscle car wars, through the gas crisis, through the 80s, and into the 90s, the small block Chevy was still going strong. They were reliable, dependable, and the workhorse of the free world. Sure, they got updates like fuel injection and the naming conventions got changed up. But up until 1992, that first-gen small block Chevy, for all intents and purposes, was the same motor. The LT1 of the early 90s marked a new chapter though. Coming after 1992, while still technically a small block, it brought updates like reverse flow cooling, which cooled the heads before the block to reduce knock and increase compression. Overall, it was a good change, but the real generational shift for the small block came in 1997 with the LS1. Introduced in the C5 Corvette, it was a true clean sheet redesign. Still a 90-degree pushrod V8 with the 4.4-inch bore spacing of the old motors, but now built with an aluminum block, coil-on plug ignition, and a rigid deep skirt block design. It made more power, weighed less, and opened the floodgates for what would become the LS era, a modern renaissance of GM's small block performance. Since then, General Motors' small block V8 has evolved through multiple further generations. You had the LS1, you had the Gen 4 motors, and now you have the Gen 5 LT series motors with direct injection, variable valve timing, and better combustion efficiency. Yet, through it all, the DNA remains unmistakable. Compact dimensions, cam and block simplicity, and a power-to-weight ratio that rivals far more complex engines. Think about how much more complex a Ford Coyote motor is today with its quad overhead cams compared to the simple LT motors. What made the small block Chevy a legend wasn't just its power, it was how much it could do for how little cost, how many different roles it could play, and how long it stuck around. The economies of scale made it cheap to produce, smart and simple engineering made it easy to improve, and its compactness meant that it could fit just about everywhere, from Corvettes to resto mods to dump trucks to dragsters. The small block Chevy didn't just change the world, it became a part of it. And with over 110 million being built over the years, I'd say it rightfully earns that spot as the greatest automobile production engine ever made. But let me know in the comments down below if you disagree. Thank you all for watching another Rare Cars video. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps me out. But otherwise, I will see you all in the next one, enthusiasts.